Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Everyone, I'm Chris Bonango from the Warning Decision Training Division. I'd like to welcome you to our 9th installment of our revival of the Storm of the Month series. Today's presentation comes to you from the Warning Decision Training Division in Norman, Oklahoma. Our presenter is Jim LaDue, who will be presenting stories from the Remote Quick Response Team. And with all that being said, Jim, the floor is yours, so go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. And I do want to say that I'm happy to see that many people are here, and hopefully this will be interesting to you. You know, one of the things about a QRT is probably not something you're going to experience or deal with on an everyday basis. And I'm going to try to explain a few things that may say that the people that are with the QRT are available for any kind of collaboration or consultation. It doesn't have to take a once-in-a-lifetime event or anything like that. It could be any kind of damage. So, you know, let's say, offer my hand even for the offices that were affected by, let's say, the derecho. That's an interest of mine, too, is straight line wind damage and so forth. So with that said, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the history behind the QRT. This was something that was made after the La Plata tornado in 2002. And the reason why it was made was that there was an interest to bring forth and engage expertise to help offices out that don't experience these kinds of events very often. Being that this was in Maryland, for example, this was literally a very rare EF4. In fact, I think in the Sterling's area, maybe the first one, but I'm not quite sure. But certainly in that vicinity, the last one was in 1993. And so there was a lot of time that passed between that. And that kind of experience and so forth becomes a little bit rusty. So hopefully I'll clear up some of these things in discriminating some of this kind of damage. But this tornado went right through downtown La Plata and then came out the east side and hit some neighborhoods over here just east of downtown. And you look at some aerial pictures. Originally, by the way, this tornado was rated EF5. And a couple teams were asked to come out and take a look at this event. And there's a couple aerial photos that were supplied as well. And you can see here, this is one of them that was in a neighborhood east of downtown La Plata. And there are a couple homes that, let's say that the entire house is completely removed from the foundations, such as this one here. And already you see the label, slider, and so forth. Originally, this was rated higher. There was a municipal building, an unreinforced brick building in downtown that was also rated fairly high and still is, actually. That's still the F4 rating. This one, though, was rather interesting. This and a couple other houses had the entire house swept off the back end of the foundation. And yet, if you look at the context around it, it doesn't fit. For example, we have a mailbox still standing right here. Multiple trees and bushes, relatively undisturbed, although there are quite a few that you see some damage in the background and so forth. And so there was that. But it was the discontinuity between the context and the house that raised alarm bells. And so Tim Marshall was out there and he saw this house and noted that the house was on a hillside where the basement opened up into the backyard. The foundation walls on the backside were consisting of unreinforced concrete masonry unit blocks. And so once the pressure and the forces were applied to the main part of the house basically just toppled that wall, and then the house followed suit, toppling into the backyard. So as a result of that, we have a QRT. And so what is it? What is a QRT? Well, it's a team of experienced surveyors and experts in other fields such as engineering, architecture, or perhaps even forestry, for example. And they are there to help collaborate between you guys and them to help create a consensus team, so to speak. So we may collaborate, and originally the QRT was designed to collaborate in person. And so they would travel there on literally what this means, quick response, hopefully getting there by the next day. More recently, though, more and more of these have become remote QRTs, and that's the angle at which I'm going to pursue in this talk. So what does this mean? It's a learning opportunity between us, let's say the QRT members, and the field offices. So we both learn from each other as we experience what the situation is like on the ground and then the office learning from the experts, so to speak, on things that go on. So originally in the directive, the way it is written right now, a QRT is formed when the WFO notifies the Regional Operations Center of a potentially greater than EF3 damage. And the tornado is announced initially as potentially greater than EF3. So at least there's an initial announcement in the outbound communications from the office. Then the Regional Operations Centers contacts a list of what they determine are experts, and that may vary by region. There is no one list out there. But then also the NWS headquarters and ROCs are supposed to coordinate, especially when it concerns travel, because this is a headquarters expense. Remotely, it tends to be a little bit less formal because there is no real travel expense. So then the QRT and the WFOs collaborate, and then when there is one, the QRT supplies input into the NWS field office management. So the MIC, or say a designee, determines and then announces the final rating through a public information state. All right, so let me talk a little bit about some other notable QRTs. I'm kind of myopic a little bit about this, so I'll just talk about some of my experiences. I'm going to start off with 3. Given time, I have to go through this fairly quickly. This one here was the first deployment where I went out after the EF scale was instituted. There was one other tornado the day before that hit somewhere near Blue Mound, Kansas, which was also a very intense tornado. And kind of I served as a remote QRT on that with a house that was kind of slabbed, so to speak. This one here, we went out and did an aerial survey and looked at some intense damage somewhere on the east side of Lake Mac. I am looking to the north. And this was a neighborhood of manufactured houses. And you can see that there's complete destruction. There were fatalities here. It was a bad scene. There are also multiple trees here, and that's the interesting thing. Manufactured homes really get swept off their foundations at EF2, and so they didn't qualify. But it was the trees that were interesting, at least to me, and here's a close-up picture. These are live oak trees, and live oak trees are notoriously strong. If you have ever seen the pictures of the Mississippi coast after Camille or Katrina, in fact, both of them, there are trees that have survived both hurricanes there right on the coast with their storm surge, and they're still there today. So that might give you a sense and appreciation about how strong these are. So when I saw some of them stubbed like this with chain link fence wrapped around the base of the trunk and then stretched downwind, I was notably impressed. So here we are with a tree DI where potentially, and with this kind of tree, I would go above expected wind speed. Do you go with a, let's say, stub debarked tree 2 miles per hour over the EF3, EF4 boundary at this point? Now, this is something where the EF scale's new. There's no experience with it. And I think at this point, we played the conservative end and stayed with EF3 at this point. So it's understandable we needed more confirmation. We just didn't have the confidence to really push it to the max. And this is a lesson for down the road, because I'm going to point out another one where we had a similar conundrum, so to speak. Okay, let's go to this year. There are a lot of QRTs in between those two, but I think this is more recent memories, so I want to go ahead and describe some of the challenges here, because now, we're in the age of the pandemic, it's all remote, and we depend solely on the evidence that's supplied by the local field office to make a determination. So, or at least provide some useful guidance and input. So here it is. This is a very spectacular tornado. I think you've seen a lot of the video with people ridiculously close to it on the back end. It was very strong. It was a narrow tornado. And you can see the track. The most interesting part, and this is the part here the office was interested in, was at the star here. And let's go on and zoom in. And you can see this is on a country road at the bend. Here's an aerial picture supplied by the Tail County Sheriff's Office, which I found absolutely indispensable. And you can see that this house apparently was slabbed. Actually, more than that. It's actually a depressed basement. so that the basement is underneath this part of the house. And then it had an attached garage with a slab foundation. You can see numerous trees around it, all denuded. And you can see the track of the tornado and the crops, with the center line going right here and then very close to the house as it goes to the northeast. So Central Regional Operations Center put out a call that evening. So I was on the email list along with a few others. And this is what they described, which is exactly, by the book. We're looking for, at a potentially higher than EF3, we're looking for a few volunteers. So if you were lucky, you got this email that evening and volunteer. They wanted to make sure that they get the QRT by midday the next day. So they were making the call and the team by 9 a.m., first come, first serve. The team wound up being Greg Gust, who's WCM, of course, and he has to be on it, at the Grand Forks office. And then Brian Smith, who is the warning coordination meteorologist at Omaha. And of course, he was a Ted Fujita student. He was also in the team to build the original EF scale. Ryan Nutzvig, who's the forecaster there at Grand Forks, and then me. I was really kind of playing a little bit of a background role on this one here. There were pictures and drone imagery supplied on Google Docs, and the initial thought really was talking EF3-4. People were kind of conservative, and this is where we decided to go with that. So here's the picture that was supplied. There were a few other pictures showing the foundation, but all from roughly the same distance here. This one happens to be pointed to the east-northeast or east. And immediately we saw that 3/4 of this foundation was a concrete masonry unit block foundation, where you can see the interior was stuccoed, with a, let's say, a mortar mix to smooth out the walls. Most of the cells in the foundation were unfilled with grout. The far wall over here by the garage was more of like a poured foundation, concrete wall. There were anchor bolts in the grouted cells about every 7 feet, maybe 5 to 6 feet on the east side, and then maybe one anchor bolt within 1.5 feet of the corners. Here's an example of one of them. It's the same picture, we just blew it up, and you can see right here is the anchor bolt. It's got a washer, it was bent over. On the other side by the garage, you can see evidence of an anchor bolt here, and then down farther. I think one of these was stripped. Nothing within 1.5 feet of the corners here. They all remain, although this one appears to be broken. But the key thing is that we did not see any masonry unit blocks damaged or lifted off along with the sill plate. We also likewise didn't see any sill plate left. In fact, we didn't even see any debris, as a matter of fact. You don't see any here in this picture, which is rather interesting in itself. Anyway, that is where we're trying to figure out, okay, there's some things here that we thought about. First, we're thinking, okay, it was difficult to figure out how many anchor bolts there were, but Greg Gust was at site and he mentioned the spacing of the anchor bolts, and then also, in fact, a few more details of the house that helped us, and he helped us identify these anchor bolts and where they were, and he could describe what they were. So that was very useful. The other one is that we were looking at this and thinking about it, and while we're not thinking EF3-4 boundary, to go to EF3, you would have to go with this level of damage 2 miles an hour below the EF4. There's only 2 miles per hour down there between the EF3-4 boundary and then the bottom or lowest possible wind speed you could supply to the degree of damage that we see here. And the degree of damage is 10, basically debris swept off the foundation of a reasonably well-constructed house. So that's another thing. We have to make assumptions. We cannot see any substantial debris other than what's left here. And so we are making those assumptions that the rest of the house was likewise constructed similarly to what we're seeing here. And that's not always the case, by the way, but we have to make that. So this is not an EF3-4. But just to further help us along, let's take a look at the context here. And we'll take a look at vehicles. You see one here that's in the foundation. But according to the damage assessment team, this is the OTC, and I forgot what that stood for, but the sheriffs were also there, and so this is a municipal damage team, county-based and state-based. So they were there. Greg interviewed them, and they said there were 3 cars total. Here's one. The other one was transported 30 to 40 yards to the northeast and lost its engine. The other one was transported 300 yards to the northeast, and they still haven't retrieved it. So that is significant right there. You all know the old F scale, and it had what included in there with vehicles. So maybe we can't use it explicitly, but it helps support the idea and the framework of what we're deciding about the house. Same thing with the trees. Okay, these are DIs. Multiple snap tree trunks. Some of them were spruce, others deciduous. And notice a couple things here. Several of them were transported long distances. Here's a snap tree trunk, the one you see on the left. The remains of the tree are over here to the right. Also, likewise, we see a pile of tree trunks here in the field off to the west that were transported opposite of tornado motion from the trees here northwest of the house. So we're talking about stub trees, some debarking, all denuded, with transport of large portions or all of the trees. Now, that's not a degree of damage in itself right now, but it will be based on the new tree DI that we're working on as a standards committee. So all that helps support the idea that this is a significant damage event. And so this is where we're going with it. So we're talking about 4. The anchor bolt is spaced a little excessive optimal, but not too bad. But we're definitely not going 3. So really helpful info. The disaster team, personal accounts, aerial imagery. But we could have used photos at each corner of the house along with a tape measure. And that would improve the event. All right, next few minutes here, we'll talk about the Jackson office. This is Bassfield, Mississippi on 12th April 2020. This time Southern Region and NWS Jackson contacted me, and I wound up inviting some experts from our standards committee. So now we have a mixture of engineers and architects and a tree fall person. And we were supplied similar photos, drone footage, and then Sentinel true color imagery. So here's the site. This is the area of interest that we're looking at. And here's the Sentinel imagery, and you can see this obvious scar going right through. And we're looking at this field, and specifically right in the center of this yellow box. So the damage level is pretty obvious here on satellite. You know, we're looking at a significant tornado. Here's a close-up picture taken. This is Logan Poole's video single. And Logan is a let's say a person with some expertise in flying drones, and he was very helpful in providing a lot of the evidence and imagery that I'm going to show you here coming up. So here's a closer up picture of it, and you can see the homestead right here, and then there's a long transport of a vehicle that landed here. So this is the setting that we have. We're looking towards which the tornado came. If you look here more closely, you can see that the house is really not a full house. It's a cabin, but it does have heat and air, and it was actually a functioning place where somebody could live. So technically it is a 1 and 2 family house, and that's what we're going to use. We have trees also, and some of them, you can see this one pulled out of the ground and pushed forward some distance, and a couple others ripped out, and certainly very severe tree damage like with the other one. The key thing here is Logan came back. You know, we had one day we looked at all this, but we needed more information. He went back and talked to the builder, and the builder documented a whole bunch of stuff on the construction details and everything else. And this was absolutely crucial here. And he also supplied a picture here of what Courtney is the name of the builder here. You can see the actual original houses and the way it looked, at least at that time. So this one here is a 2x4 stud with a gable roof end, tempered glass weather shield windows. There's exterior insulated foam board sheathing. It's not the greatest. You'd rather have OSB or plywood exterior sheathing. A porch on northwest side, driveway on southeast side. So here's the anchoring, the shot nails, and half-inch bolts. At least 2 bolts had no nut or washer, which was important to note. And the bolts should be 6 foot or less apart by code, but some were farther apart. There was an expansion bolt which got pulled out. That's basically a big bolt you just drill right in after the foundation's laid. And you got to be careful about how those are built. Some corners had bolts greater than 12 inches from the edges. You would prefer to have them 12 inches by code. So, but we still labeled this DOD 10. I mean, it had sufficient voltage. Here's the description: debris swept away. But we put the wind speed below expected, at least so far. But there's a big however, and I'm going to show you this coming up next. And that is this right here. So we have this vehicle. Look at the mark right here. This is where the vehicle was originally at the driveway. So the mark showed evidence that the vehicle slid this way towards us and then quite likely impacted the house before it went on elsewhere. And the builder mentioned he found house wrap on the vehicle. So all indications seem to indicate that as the house might have been disintegrated, but at the same time, the vehicle certainly helped. And because of that, we couldn't really use this DI right here to make our determination. So instead, we looked at the trees again. And here's now a completely different scene. Again, bark denuded trees. Some of the trees bodily moved. And as you can see, 100% tree fall, snappage, everything. So this one here, Chad Entremont chimed in and said, you know, my ears in Jackson, and he's got a lot of ears there, and that means a lot of tornadoes. And never have I seen this intensity of tree damage. And so at this point, and along with the forest ecologist who was out of the University of Georgia, kind of chimed in and concurred, we decided at this point, given their experience level and what we're used to seeing, that we would use the trees to push the EF4 by 2 miles per hour based on the level of damage that was visible there. The house was typical construction. There was some flaws in the anchoring, no rigid exterior sheathing. And I'd like to see that, but you know, the vehicle impact, can't use a DI with collateral damage like that. So we decided to still go to EF4 based on this at that site, but it was not an EF5 level here. The key thing, though, is very in-depth talk with the builder. It was extremely valuable in the absence of debris for evaluation. We had multiple experts and strong consensus, and Logan's video and interview also absolutely invaluable for providing the sufficient amount of information that we can make a pretty good call. There wasn't any tape measure here until this point, although if you don't have something like a tape measure, you could certainly use a phone if you knew exactly what the dimensions were, or in this case, a $10 bill will work just fine. But ideally, I'd like to have a tape measure. Here's some best practices that I want to kind of convey. I want 3 pictures of different angles with the background behind the DI plainly visible. Multiple pictures of critical connections relevant to the DOD with tape measuring pics. And then interviewing homeowners or other people in the know. For trees, take close-up shots of the leaves or the bark for identification. This is going to become even more important pretty soon. And then the context is the more distant shots useful right there. And of course, aerial pictures. So this is the way you would want to look at it right here. Close-up shots and then 3 pictures surrounding, getting the background around each one, behind and around the house or the DI in question. Finally, shameless plug. We got a course, the DAT course and the EF scale course are in there and available for everybody. And at least right now, I want to go ahead and thank you very much. Here's my email, but you can contact anybody in WDTD at this point. I'll take questions if you have any time there.
Thanks, Jim. Well, it's a very informative presentation. I think with that, we're approaching our time limit, so we'll go ahead and wrap up today's Storm of the Month session. So thanks for taking time out of your day to attend, and thanks, Jim, for presenting, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks very much, everyone.